Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sonia Gray and this is From the South, the evening news brief from Tell Us Your English. And we'll start this new edition right now. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos has met with the FARC in Cartagena to review the peace process, advancements and challenges. Former Prime Minister Felipe Gonzalez and former President of Uruguay, José Mujica, participated as international mediators. FARC members have accused the Colombian government of not completing its end of the peace accords in signing just over 1 year ago. Our correspondent in Bogotá, Milton Henao, has this.
Así es, compañeros, pues en este momento aún se desarrolla esta reunión.
The meeting still between the FARC party and the Colombian government has concluded today in Cartagena. However, little is known about the decisions and results of the agreements. The statement of the Peace Process Observation Committee said that only 18% of the peace agreements signed in Havana has been fulfilled. Since the agreement was signed in November 2016, at least 105 human rights activists have died. Over 59% of them were killed executed. Also, small-scale farmers participating in Colombia's peace agreement continue to be gunned down or harassed in their rural communities. It is important to remember that a few weeks ago, the Colombian Congress failed to pass important peace legislation.
The chance of a worker obtaining a pension in Colombia has become an almost unattainable dream. The obstacles put in place by the government and private entities continue to increase, as our correspondent has been finding out.
For worker and pensioners unions, the proposed initiative meant to increase the retirement age as well as the number of contributions required to retire is yet another attack against the working class by the government, big business, and private pension funds. The government argues pensioners represent a significant drain of public resources, and this is a solution to the fiscal deficit.
En el régimen pensional privado,
what we have discovered in the private pension system is that there is not a high number of pensioners. But we can see that it is these private funds that are pushing to extend their retirement age so that they don't have to pay anyone.
A los efectos de prácticamente no pensionar a nadie en el corto plazo.
In the past, the pension system relied upon the Colombian government. By creating Law 100, sponsored by former President Álvaro Uribe Vélez, private funds took over management of the resources paid for by Colombian citizens to eventually retire.
It was a deal for private businesses. The private sector enriched itself through the savings and hopes of individuals who plan to retire with those funds.
Workers' unions and the general population believe the solution to the pension deficit is for the government to once again be in charge of these resources, not to raise the retirement age from 65 to 67 years old.
We hope this situation is resolved by the government, taking control of the pension system in order to avoid situations like this, which attack citizens' trust.
For Colombian business people and the government, the retirement age must increase, and as such, many initiatives have been brought forth to Congress in 2018. This will be a top priority for the government.
Peru's defense minister is the latest member of the government to resign over a pardon granted by President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski to the former leader Alberto Fujimori. Jorge Nieto is the third member of the cabinet to step down in protest at the pardon, following the example set by the Minister of Culture, Salvador del Solar, and the Interior Minister, Carlos Basombrio. Tested against the pardon outside the Organization of American States in Washington. As the political fallout from the measure continues, there are reports that the leader of the Fuerza Popular Party, Keiko Fujimori, has removed the faction left by her brother, Kenji, from the party's group in Congress. Kenji and his supporters blocked a move in Congress to impeach President Kuczynski, allegedly as part of a deal to secure his father's pardon. And in Chile, human rights organizations and migrants have also been protesting outside the Peruvian embassy over the release of Alberto Fujimori, who was serving 25 years in prison for corruption and human rights abuses. They delivered a letter calling for solidarity with the protesters in Peru and said that the pardon is an appalling example of impunity for all of Latin America.
This pardon hurts us. It hurts us what the Peruvian families have been through. The victims that until today haven't received justice. It's a disastrous precedent, not only for the Peruvian people, but also for all the human rights victims of Latin America's dictatorships.
Today, as a courageous act, the Chilean people and the National Coordinator of Human Rights are here to support the Peruvian people. Justice is a necessity for the people.
Human rights organizations in Peru are working on several legal angles to revoke the pardon granted to Alberto Fujimori.
Since President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski freed Alberto Fujimori, family members of those killed in Barrios Altos and La Cantuta University during Fujimori's regime have been working on several legal actions to revoke this humanitarian pardon and make the former president serve his 25-year sentence.
This is the only way we can make things happen. All the different governments have never listened to us. What we want is justice and to be heard.
They have reached out to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, where an audience will take place on February 2nd. An opportunity for the victim's defense to present its case against Fujimori's pardon.
The pardon was based on a political move, and not on a humanitarian decision. Also, this broke several international processes that are regulated by Peru's law. Former President Fujimori doesn't have any serious health problems to be granted a humanitarian pardon.
Human rights organizations filed a complaint against this pardon in order for Fujimori to face trial for other crimes, like the killing of 6 campesinos in Pativilca village.
Is it possible that the government could stop a legal process that denies victims the truth and ensure that all those responsible are judged and punished after due process? We don't think so. That is why we are asking the criminal court to control this legal process.
Meanwhile, several social organizations called for a new demonstration to reject the pardon to Fujimori on January 11.
Our correspondent in Lima, Jaime Herrera, has new updates.
Yet another high-profile official has resigned from the government of Pedro Pablo Kuczynski after the political crisis that has been hitting the country for the last few weeks. This time, it is the Minister of Defense, Jorge Nieto Montesinos, that joined Salvador del Solar, Ministry of Culture, and Carlos Basombrio, Ministry of the Interior, to reject the pardon of President Kuczynski granted to Alberto Fujimori. Other public servants have also resigned, especially those working for human rights government programs. This is the case of Roger Rodriguez, former official at the Ministry of Justice, who criticized the government's decision and said that Fujimori didn't comply with all that was needed to ask for a pardon, and that the former president has no serious health conditions putting his life in danger. Until today, 14 officials have resigned from the Pedro Pablo Kuczynski's government, who has been in office for just 1 year and a half. People are announcing more demonstrations in the coming days to reject the pardon.
Jaime Herrera with that report. A 24-hour strike by state workers is taking place as part of ongoing protests against labor reforms and the economic policies of the Argentine government. The latest protest in a string of anti-government demonstrations comes as the government announced an increase of 30 to 60% of bus fares in an effort to reduce the fiscal deficit. In the coming days, President Macri is expected to announce increases in the price of fuel, electricity, water and gas.
It has been almost 2 years since we modified the transport rates. For this reason, we are carrying out this gradual and staggered updating, which will start as of February 1st.
With the increases in the cost of education, gas, food, everything is expensive now. And the truth is that I'm still looking for a job, so I hope to get lucky because we know that complicated economic times are coming.
Our correspondent, Edgardo Esteban, is with the striking state workers in Buenos Aires, and he sent this report.
Argentine state workers from all over the country have stopped their activities for the next 24 hours to mobilize from downtown Buenos Aires to the Ministry of Planning as a form of protest against Mauricio Macri's decision to fire public workers and to close public institutions as one of his neoliberal measures. Around 1,200 workers were fired at the end of 2017 and at the beginning of 2018. This forecasts an intense year for social protests and workers' mobilizations. Not only state workers, but also labor unions and workers' associations from all over the country, starting from the current withdrawal of thousands of jobs by Mauricio Macri's government, which also affects the private sector.
Ricardo Esteban with that report. Puerto Rico's Governor Ricardo Rosello says at least 150,000 Puerto Ricans left after Hurricane Maria hit the island more than 3 months ago. The announcement comes after Rosello met with Senators Richard Blumenthal and Chris Murphy to discuss recovery efforts on the island and what to do next to bring the country back to normalcy. During the press conference, the governor said that the number of people who left the island ranges between 150,000 and 250,000. And we have more news in a minute, so stay with us. Welcome back. The campaign for Ecuador's national referendum on February 4th has begun. Social and political organizations are forming strategies to win over the electorate. More details in this report.
40 social and political organizations have been authorized to hold a month-long campaign for either the yes or no options in the upcoming referendum. The Women's National Permanent Forum, an organization in defense of human rights, and one of only 4 registered in support of a no vote, explain why they have chosen to stand against the government's proposals.
This will be a campaign for and by the people, by women, by the youth, who are aware that this whole thing is an unnecessary whim. We do not need an unconstitutional and illegal referendum.
Similar organizations, along with assembly members of Alianza País, who support the views of Rafael Correa, the leader of the Citizen Revolution, will be campaigning for a no vote in the referendum. One of their main arguments is what they call President Lenin Moreno's betrayal of the party's principles.
We will vote no, rejecting President Lenin Moreno's betrayal. He got support by aligning himself with the victories of the past 10 years and using Rafael Correa's Citizen Revolution, only to turn into the worst of traitors.
Other organizations and political players who have long been against the Citizen Revolution have also started to travel to different cities supporting a yes vote in the referendum.
Today marks a real and concrete possibility for us to regain a multi-party system.
Ecuadorians will once again go to the polls to answer 7 questions, 5 of which involve constitutional reforms, while the remaining 2 are questions about oil drilling and land speculation.
The European Union's foreign policy chief, Federica Mogherini, has rejected North American sanctions against Cuba while on a 2-day visit to the island. Mogherini said the EU cannot accept restrictions on European relations with the island and that any ties between EU and Cuba are actually stronger than ever. She was speaking at the University of Havana during a trip to strengthen economic and political ties between the 2 nations.
We reject the North American sanctions against your citizens, companies, and European interests. We cannot accept unilateral measures that impede or restrict our economic and commercial relations with Cuba. It is useless to rebuild walls from past periods, and it can only worsen the situation. True strength is dialogue and cooperation.
Our correspondent in Havana, Laura Prada, has more details for us.
Hello, yes, nice to greet you from Havana. Indeed, the High Representative of the European Union, Federica Mogherini, started yesterday her visit to the island. This is her third visit to Cuba, and in this time she will be meeting with government authorities. Yesterday, for example, she met with the Foreign and Commerce Minister Rodrigo Malmierca to see which areas of cooperation were suitable for the European Union, and the areas that already Cuba and the European Union were exchanging, if they could be extended. Also, she met with Culture Minister Abel Prieto, and she gave a conference at the Colegio San Jerónimo of Old Havana, where she stated that the U.S. blockade against Cuba is illegal and obsolete. She also said that the European Union will still be by Cuba's side, holding her hand in this time, and while countries build walls and close windows, European Union will build bridges and open doors so cooperation can go in both sides. Yesterday, after this conference, she walked around Old Havana accompanied by the Eusebio Leal, and today's agenda is very interesting, because in the morning she just a few moments ago she met with the President of the National Assembly, Esteban Lasso Hernandez, and she's about to meet with the Foreign Minister of Cuba, Bruno Rodriguez, where they will be talking about the cooperation agreement and political dialogue between Cuba and the European Union, to see if it could be implemented completely in this moment. Afterwards, in the afternoon, is expected a press conference where the High Representative will be giving the results of her visit to the island and what can be expected in the future of this relationship between European Union and Cuba. This is all I have for now, but I'm sure we'll be getting back together. I get back to you.
Laura Prada there in Havana. Despite the campaign promises of Panamanian President Juan Carlos Varela calling for a constituent process, a new constitution continues without being a reality. Panamanian social and political movements have said that this is vital to end the inequality and corruption that is increasing in the isthmus.
2018 is the penultimate year in office for the government of President Juan Carlos Varela. A new cycle begins, and the campaign promise of a constituent assembly still hasn't been kept.
The proposal presented by the president is not meant to be fulfilled. There are many hidden interests. An original constituent assembly is what people want, because this is a democratic mechanism meant to put an end to state corruption. So they don't want to make this a reality. They're looking to control our country with false promises that in the end do not resolve Panamanians' needs.
The executive power not only refuses to call for a constituent assembly, but also to promote any deep changes in all the country's public institutions.
Because it involves changing all the rules of the game, and it will imply a new economic and political model for the country. It is obvious that these cannot be accepted by the groups in power, who enrich themselves every day by using the old constitution.
A new constitution would also help to sweep away problems of inequality. Panama is one of the most unequal countries in the world, and more than 20% of the population lives in poverty.
It must start from the needs of the population. Recognize that the people rely on our sovereignty. That power is in the hands of the people. If we create a new constitution, it has to be in favor of the poor majority, and start from the fact that it needs to be a constitution that helps everyone.
The new constitution would be an instrument for the social movements to fight against increasing corruption, and is seen as the best hope for reforming the foundations of the state.
Former Mexican State Governor Roberto Borge has been extradited from Panama, where he faces corruption charges. Mexican prosecutors accuse Borge of using funds obtained illegally, fraud, and abuse of public office. Borge was arrested in Panama City in June 2017 as he was preparing to board a flight to Paris. Brazil's state oil company Petrobras will pay almost $3 billion to settle a legal complaint filed by the investors in a New York court after the car wash corruption scandal broke out. Their defense said that the settlement does not recognize that the state company was involved in any irregular process. Brazilian authorities have returned more than $400 million to the company, recovered from those cooperating with the investigation. The Pope is soon to visit Peru and Chile, and preparations for his visit are in full flow. A planned mass in the Chilean capital of Santiago is expected to attract more than 500,000 people. Banners decorated the cathedral where the pontiff will hold mass, and builders are working in O'Higgins Park, where Francis will give a sermon. He will also visit the cities of Temuco and Iquique before heading out to Peru, where he will stop in Lima, Puerto Maldonado, and Trujillo. And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Welcome back. Catalan leader Oriol Junqueras has asked to be released from jail after more than 2 months in detention for his role in the independence movement. State prosecutors have asked the court to keep the separatist leader in jail, preventing him from swearing in at the opening session of the new Catalan parliament, where his party holds a slim majority with 32 seats. Next week, another separatist leader, Jordi Sanchez, will also appear in court.
Esta situación no les puede privar de sus derechos civiles.
They can't be deprived of their civil rights. If they were chosen, they have to be able to exercise their functions as parliamentarians. But doing it is hard when they are jailed 700 kilometers away.
U.S. President Donald Trump's lawyers have written to his former strategist, Steve Bannon, saying he has violated a non-disclosure agreement after Bannon had called Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with Russians treasonous. In the latest development, Trump's lawyers are seeking to stop the release of a new book by Michael Wolff containing explosive insights into his presidency. The letter demands that the author and the book's publisher immediately cease and desist from any further publication, release, or dissemination of the book or excerpts from it. The book supposedly questions Trump's fitness for office and is due for release on January 9th. Earlier, we spoke to our Washington, D.C. correspondent, Jorge Gestoso, who gave us the latest development in the Trump-Bannon saga.
On the other hand, we know that Paul Manafort, that was the former campaign director of Mr. Trump, has sued the special counsel Robert Mueller, saying that the assistant basically the assistant justice minister, what we call it in Latin America, was not having the authority to name Mr. Mueller as a special prosecutor, and therefore that is a new development trying in a way to slow down that investigation. According to Mr. Stephen Bannon, this investigation is going through one only direction and is getting closer and closer to the inner circle of President Trump, and that direction is, in his words, money laundering.
Record-shattering cold has gripped much of the eastern United States, causing at least a dozen deaths so far. The Arctic freeze has also led to the closure of schools and is affecting travel throughout the region. Officials have opened warming centers in the Deep South and have urged residents to alert social services if they see people stuck outside in the harsh temperatures. The weather forecasters have also warned of a major winter storm later this week. And our correspondent in Washington, Francesca Emanuel, filed this report.
En estos momentos nos encontramos a menos 8 grados Celsius.
Right now, we are facing a temperature of minus 8 degrees Celsius, and authorities have already announced that since Tuesday, at least 11 people have died. Experts said that the worst is yet to come. On Wednesday night, we are facing a climate phenomenon called bombogenesis, which causes a dramatic lowering of pressure, and a rapidly intensifying bomb cyclone is generated and turned into a winter hurricane. Authorities of several states like New York have asked public workers not to attend work on Wednesday. In Georgia, a state of emergency has been declared and many schools had to close. This cold wave is affecting nearly 100 million people in Mexico, the United States and Canada. It has been such a harsh winter that in Canada, they even had to protect penguins from their outdoor space in a zoo because the temperature was below 25 degrees and they couldn't stand it. But not only the center and northern part of the US is affected. Even in the state of Florida, there are areas where in the next days experts are forecasting that it could snow. This is the freezing situation now in the states, which has led authorities to stay alert and encourage citizens to take care of their health and avoid more fatal casualties like the 11 deaths that have already occurred.
Francesca Emmanuel with that report. We go now to Kenya, where communities are creating their own models of wildlife conservation to tackle poverty. Let's take a look.
We are in the county of Samburu, on the border with Lake Pia. Moses Lodungokiok is the manager of the community reserve of Lutungai. It is managed by and for the communities that inhabit it.
We will keep this part at rest, because of 3 reasons. First, to manage the pastures, as you can see the grass is in better condition in this part. 2, with the goal of conserving our national wildlife. And 3, to focus on the development.
The neighborhood committees work primarily in marking the boundaries of the protected spaces. This is to plan the management of the grass that keeps their cattle alive. The reserve was created in 2004, but the Samburus and Pokots, neighbors of the community, didn't get along until 3 years ago. All of this land was nobody's land, where nothing could be done.
The conflict continued because the problem was that the Pokot felt that they are being chased away from the Samburu County. So we received some resistance from the Pokot, and as a result of that, we fought with the Pokot from the year 2004 through 2012.
The commitment to jointly manage the reserve brought the communities peace, but the challenge is huge due to the pressure of climate change and the policy imposed on neighboring Lake Pia. Some nomad families with their herds still find shelter in the heart of the protected space. Lokdabio Lukwalam, who is a Pokot, says he lost 46 cows on the Muji in Lake Pia during the dry season, where 6 survived. He and his large family lives off his flock of sheep and goats. They live surrounded by wild animals, and they know that if a goat gets lost, it will be devoured. They are pleased with the conservation project. Although they live without access to schools and health centres, they still don't know how long the project will stay there. The only reason why they've been here for 3 years is because they've found peace. The great challenge of the reserve is to organize as a community, Pokots, Samburus and Ndorobos, hoping that no one will be excluded in the committees and that the development of the reserve creates work, duties and benefits for the people from Lutungai.
And that report brings us to the end of this evening's news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Sony Gray. Have a good afternoon.